everyone. We are here today, the V3 webinar. So I just want to welcome you from V3. And we are having a series of webinars where we're discussing how to start a new faith community in 2024. And what do we need to think about in 2024 for church planting or faith community, business's mission, all of that, like starting today. It's a new world. It's been a new world for a few years, but we're still figuring it all out, right? So in this webinar, we are going to talk about church planting and being neuro-informed while you church plant. Fancy words, but they mean, are we aware of how the brain and the soul work and what is important for them as we church plant? So I've got my friend here today, Steve Cuss. We're going to have a conversation. You'll have the chance to weigh in some questions. So as questions come up for you, we want you to put those in the Q&A. That's what I'll open. If you put them in the chat, I won't see it. I'm going to open the Q&A when we get to that part of the conversation. But our webinar today is sponsored by the V3 Church Planting Learning Cohorts. So if you are interested, or if you think maybe God is asking you, putting it on your heart to do a church plant, we have a very specific style that we like to coach you in. It's designed for people who are co-vocational, bivocational, normal, ordinary persons who are feeling the response and that call to maybe initiate something. We have our learning cohorts will start this September. It's an 8 months of practical training, grounded. It's not an information dump. It's actually coaching, learning cohort. So if you're interested in that, you can always go to the website, v3movement.org, for more information. And we'd love to chat with you about that. So that's who's sponsoring us today, brought us together. But let's get into it, because you are here because you are interested in how the brain, the soul, the personhood of these people that we feel called to steward or to lead or to even live life with. What does it mean? What do we need to know about them for church planting or even initiating faith community groups today? So, Steve, I want to give you the opportunity to just let our audience know a little more about you if they don't, and introduce yourself. But yeah, share the journey that brings you here in the short version.
Yeah, great, Jessie. Thanks so much. Yeah, so I grew up in Perth, Western Australia. I was an unchurched kid, very secular, came to Christ as a teenager. Came to America for theological education, and my life was blown up when I became a trauma and hospice chaplain. I was like a classic white guy. Well, I think one of the most dangerous people in the world is a white man with a theology degree. Like, it's just, we're so used to dominating in this
I
space.
might not argue with you on that.
Oh, no. I think, I mean, I'm kind of being silly and kind of being serious. It really is the unaware young Bible college graduate who's white and male. That's a dangerous person. So that was me for sure. And I think what hospital chaplaincy did is it gave me two gifts. It plunged me into death, and that will get you to the end of yourself faster than anything else, I think. And then when I was a chaplain, I was introduced to a way of noticing anxiety that changed my life. So I wrote a book called Managing Leadership Anxiety, and part of what I'll be doing, Jessie, you're the brain expert, and I'll be coming and showing us some approaches to reactivity that can get in the way. Thrilled to be with you.
Thanks. Well, no one's an expert in the brain. It's like too vast, mysterious, wonderful. But yeah, so I come to this conversation in a little bit of, I feel like a different path, but similar spirit. So from the wilderness of Wyoming, which the people are not that dissimilar from Australians. It's this grit, live by the skin of your teeth. You're helpful, but you're not nice. You're dependable, but you're not friends, kind of background. And I led a wilderness ministry. So we taught people how to technical rock climb, technical snow mountaineering, backpacking for up to 40 days. So they're these discipleship expeditions. And I was 22. And if people didn't do the things well, then they could die. And so death was also very real. And I had friends die in mountaineering accidents and things like that in my 20s. So death was also very close, but it was the consequence of failure for us not doing things well. And that got me interested in the brain because I wanted to be able to teach something to someone once and have them remember it with a high degree of accuracy, like how to tie into the rope and how to self-arrest with the ice axe. So, um, but that very quickly became discipleship conversations. So when you're in the wilderness and all of your anxieties are coming out, all of your insecurities are being made known, how do we disciple each other through that so that we don't lose it, we don't hurt each other, we actually can still perform and go on these intensive experiences and come home alive, not just alive but also untraumatized. So you have to make a full journey. I learned that there's a full journey. If you stop too soon, you can cause trauma. But if you have to go far enough, long enough to have not just the deconstruction, but also the reconstruction. So the full journey, and how do you plan and scaffold for that? So Steve, with your anxiety, leadership anxiety, maybe tell us just a little bit more about that, and why are you focusing on leaders for anxiety as opposed to let me help you coach your congregation in anxiety? So why lean into the leader person
Yeah.
for who you're helping and who you're talking to?
I really appreciate that question because I do think the answer is really simple, Jesse. I think the only thing a leader has to offer their people is a well self. And, when you first hear that, it sounds like I'm channeling, like Oprah Winfrey or Tony Robbins or something like, self actualization. I assure you I'm not. I just think that you and I and the folks on this call could make a horrendously long list of leaders that we know or have read about that were not well while offering Jesus. And when a leader is not well while offering Jesus, terrible things happen. The least that happens is a distorted view of Christ, but more commonly you find abuse, cover up, demonizing victims, this kind of stuff. So my passion is to help leaders be well, because when you are well, you infect others with wellness. The gospel is an infecting agent, if you will. And also, what's true is when you are highly anxious and you're not aware of your anxiety, you are also highly infectious, but you're not just spreading it, you're also catching it. So, yeah, just a simple example from my life, because I do teach a very particular type of anxiety. I couldn't believe when I was a chaplain how deep my desire was to make people feel better. A source of
Mm.
my leadership anxiety, or what's clinically called reactivity, is if you're in front of me and you're upset, my brain tells me I must say something or do something to make you feel better. And if I can't say something or do something to make you feel better, terrible things will happen. So, just in that little example, you can imagine what it's like to be a young chaplain walking into room after room of grief, or somebody's dying, situations that there's nothing to say, there's nothing you can do to make it better. And my temptation to shrink down their pain to a piece of advice or to a scripture from Philippians or something pithy, believing it was for them when all the while it was for me. I found that to be fascinating, that I never knew that before. And of course, I see that in pastors all the time, very well meaning pastors. It's not from a bad place, but our anxious need to help other people we believe is from God, and it's not automatically so. That would be a simple example of why I'm into this. And if you can be a connected and aware leader that helps your people relax, that opens up their capacity to notice God so much more than if you're cajoling them or over visioning. Like, I'm all for vision, but sometimes you see the currying of faith that then sets an anxiety in a group of people. Um, so I believe if the leader's well, the people can be well, and we can all grow together.
Yeah, I love that because I'm a high vision person, but I also know that there's like an idolatry around that. And really, are we? And I also have ADD, so like, how much of us is just our vision is our working out of ADD,
Yeah.
and we're just trying to get the people to follow because instead of slowing down and holding space because it's uncomfortable. And that's kind of what I wanted to start actually is the things that make us uncomfortable with that slowing down, with that pausing, with not saying anything, and yet still being present to the situation. Um, and I know that you're familiar with this, but for me, one of the things that has become very important for me to become aware of in my own life, my own leadership, and helped me be better at being present in space with others is understanding my attachment dynamics that I'm coming from. So for those of you who don't know, attachment is this understanding or this theory that we talk about in family systems dynamics about how we are relating to other people and describing the connection that we have in the relationship, or more specifically, the security we have in the relationship. So there's secure attachment, which is where I feel connected. I feel like I know myself in this relationship and I trust this relationship. And this goes all the way back to like our childhood, but and also life. So we're still, it's not just how we were as children, it's also how we are today. So in a secure attachment situation, I trust this relationship. I know who I am. And should we have conflict, I believe, I know, I trust we can repair that and we can be okay. As opposed to insecure attachment, right? So insecure attachment then has, I don't, we either don't trust ourselves or don't know ourselves, don't trust the relationship, and we don't think repair is possible. And so there's two conditions in that. There's the anxious attachment, which is where a lot of people with, I think, those helping, serving gifts live, which is where I don't know if you're okay. So I don't know who I am in this relationship. This relationship is important to me, but I don't know if we're going to be good. So if we experience conflict, we experience rupture in there. And I'm like, I'm going to chase you down. I'm going to text you 10 times. Oh my gosh, you looked at the text, but you didn't respond. What's going on? Do I need to call you? Did I say that right? Maybe I said something wrong in the text, and that's why you're not answering it. And so we get anxious trying to restore the relationship. The other type of insecure attachment is avoidant attachment. And that's where I know myself, but I don't trust this relationship. So if we have conflict, I'm good. I'm good. I can peace out. I can cancel you. I could ghost you. I don't need us to repair our relationship. And it's a coping strategy that looks like, emotional distancing, avoiding, letting people just walk away. And so we aren't present to the pain. We aren't present to the conflict because we don't really trust the relationship. We don't know what repair would look like. There is a fourth category, which is the one that my life brings me to, and that's disorganized, which is where you have both the coping mechanisms of anxiety and the coping mechanisms of avoidant. And for me, I would say I don't know which one to use. I don't know which the right coping mechanism. So I'll go hard in on the you read the text, but you didn't respond to me. What's going on? Why are you ignoring me? And that can quickly, roll into, well, fine, that's it. We don't have to be friends. If you're going to be like that, like it could be over. And I could go through that cycle in like 5 minutes. So not a very helpful place to be coming from as a leader, not a very helpful place to be a disciple maker from. So what I love about the idea, though, that we have in V3 of having disciple making communities, especially ones that are small, because small allows us to start to deal with this stuff. Well, if we're in a congregation, if we're in a larger group, if we are part of a crowd, we don't actually get to both know ourselves in that room and find those relationships to trust. Like, how do you have a trust this relationship with the church when it's just an entity? Well, so in V3, we have these smaller groups so we can work on this, so we can get healthier here. Because like you, I say that free people. And I want to become more free so I can help others become more free, so they can help others become more free because of Christ. And that small group, then we can work on both knowing who we are in Christ, finding security there, building the relationship, finding, can I trust this relationship? Well, that takes work, right? And so this brings to the question of how we help our church planters do this in a pastoral and a neuro-informed way, because the church planters that I've been coaching, the people that are coming to them are all over. Well, they don't have any secure attachment, especially to the church, maybe to a faith community. They're coming from different types of experiences over, their lifetime or even the last few years that have either led to avoidant attachment, which is, I don't need to be part of a church right now. I don't need to be part of a faith community. I gotta check out from that for a minute. Or anxious attachment, where there's so much anxiety, so much shame, a lot. You know that one better than I do, of what's going on. And they're coming to these church plants. They're coming to these discipleship groups like that. And the people who are leading those, the people who are facilitating those, are not quite sure how to help. So with all of this background, with all of this experienced trauma, vicarious trauma from watching abusive leaders having harmed people, they're coming in with a lot of emotional distancing and anxiety. So Steve, you were a senior pastor. I've never been a senior pastor, but I have been a lead minister, but never a senior pastor. What do you think about, as a pastor, working with people who show up and they're like, I want to grow, I want to try this Christian community thing, but they have all of this, all of this trauma, all of this background, all of this anxiety or emotional distancing as coping mechanisms? How do you think, where would you share with our church planters to help to even start on how to think about the weight and the massiveness of that?
It's such a huge question. I'm really glad we're talking about it, and I'll give a little bit. I know we've just got an hour together today, but I do think as a church planter, you do tend to attract highly anxious people and really healthy people. It seems very extreme to me that these startup churches, and you have to learn quickly, okay, who's who. I find the quickest way to find the healthy people is by giving my vulnerability to them, because healthy people are attracted to vulnerability and they will give their vulnerability to you. And you're like, well, what does that mean? Just being human sized in front of them. And so I'm not a pastor to you. I'm a human being who happens to have a vocation that's pastoral. The reason I make meaning out of the Bible isn't because I'm some spiritual giant. It's because I was trained in the Bible. Just some of these basic assumptions that are true. I think in some churches, we see the person that moves us with the Bible as like some guru. But what's more honest is they were well trained. That's why they can open the Bible and make meaning of it for you. So healthy people treat me like a human being, and unhealthy people want a piece of me. They either want to take a chunk of my flesh, or they want me to enmesh with them, or Jessie and you're with that anxious attachment. When people are bringing their wounds, I think on the simplest level, what they're doing is their safety radar is up, and the safety radar is saying, can I be exactly myself in this place? Is this a place where I can be myself? Or do I have to move into self-aggrandizement or self-protection? And when people move into that, in my field, we simply call it getting bigger or smaller than human-sized.
Mhm.
When we get bigger than human-sized, we're no longer depending on God for our well-being. We're depending on ourself. That would be my default posture. I'm a big guy. I'm a white guy. I've got a deep voice. I am prone to dominate or to take over the space and not be aware of God. But I also get smaller, um, and so do you. And so people come to you. Sometimes they're trying to push you around. They're getting bigger. Sometimes they appease or flatter, or they almost put their life in your hands. Like I used to do crisis intervention in Las Vegas, and a lot of people would show up so anxious about their life, they'd almost try to hand their life to you into your care. That's getting smaller. And so I think the first step is to notice your own patterns. Like Jesse, just the way you laid out, are you more anxious or avoidant? Do you tend to enmesh? And do you need others to be well so you can be well? Do you need to cut off so you can be well? If you're aware of that for yourself, just by being aware of that, and then if you can notice when people are coming at you with it, it just deepens your capacity to connect. And I personally think that is where all discipleship happens, is through human to human connection, where your safety radar says, I can be myself in this room. And that's what you're suggesting, is that these smaller cohorts have a much better chance, I think, of that. So if you, as the leader, if your safety radar can go down, what's fascinating to me is your safety radar can stand down even when the people coming at you are very aggressive, critical, very needy. So it's no longer dependent on their behavior. It's more that you've done your own interior work, I think, with the Lord to relax into God's presence. I'm happy to give some tangibles, but that would be my immediate answer. I guess I would say one more thing, Jesse. Um, you have to be so careful as a pastor with how many hats you are wearing with people. And I don't think we're very aware of this, that all of us in pastoral ministry are always wearing at least two hats with everybody we meet. What I mean by that is I'm pastor and friend, or I'm pastor and friend and volunteer recruiter and fundraiser. Like it gets really messy. My wife's a therapist, and she will almost never see anyone from our congregation because she already has an existing hat with them, which is congregant. Or when I was a pastor, she was pastor's wife, so she was very reluctant to see anyone from our church. And I remember watching her when she first became a therapist, thinking, "Holy smokes!" Like with some people in my church, I've got five hats. And those attachment styles can get really confusing really quickly when, for example, my friends in my church are critiquing my job, even though we don't critique my friend who's the accountant. We don't sit around and say, well, how was his tax filing this week? But we all sit around and talk about Steve's sermon, for example. And that hurts me. But on the other hand, when I'm knocking on my friend's door at night, he doesn't know which hat's walking through. Is it the volunteer recruiter? Is it the friend? So even just being aware of the multiple complexity of relationships and attachment style, I think can save you a lot of grief. So I don't know if that was clear enough or concrete enough, but that's what I'd say.
Yeah, no, I thought that's super great because when I was leading the wilderness ministry, I actually over narrated what hat I was wearing. So for me, it's about communicating expectations, even within the conversation, especially if you're going to switch hats in the conversation, right? So for me, communicating expectations helps create some safety or at least bravery because either okay, I know where the boundaries are. I'm beginning to have some more courage to operate in here, or you know what, I don't like those boundaries and I'm not part of it. But it gives the people the ability to choose that. So when I was in the wilderness ministry, I was my what I tried to communicate so that they would hold me accountable to is that I was human friend first, and when I needed to be boss, I put on boss hat. So beforehand, so for the most part, I'm encouraging you to do the right, rational, reasonable, responsible thing because we're peers, and that's like what you're supposed to do. I shouldn't have to power up for you to do your responsibility. But occasionally some decisions need to be made, people needed to be corrected and be like, okay, I'm putting on my boss hat and you should do that. That's bad. You do that again where you're going to have to you're going to get in trouble. Um, but then I would take boss hat off again so that the default relationship was brother and sister. To me, I wanted to build a community of brother and sisters who were serving the Lord together, who did that like out of an intrinsic internal motivation. And we actually did a lot of work in intrinsic motivation and create an environment for that. Um, but the communicating, what can you expect from me? How do I see myself showing up here? I think not only created clarity for them, but also accountability for me, because it's interesting to me to be in working with pastors and a lot the last 10 years and to see they just people don't know how to relate to them, right? And they show up weird. And you're like, can we be friends? Can we be humans in the same space? And a lot of pastors actually don't know how to do that because they think they're always supposed to be pastoring but like your example, the accountant is not always doing your taxes. In fact, that's an agreement that you make. Otherwise, they're just a person in the world. I actually think pastors, the more they could lean into that direction, the better off we would all be. Like, I'm going to be your friend and I'm going to be a healthy, emotionally mature, spiritually mature friend. And if you need me to be your pastor in this moment, then I can be your pastor. Um, but what are some more of the concrete examples? that you have here just for our for our church planters as they're navigating. And this is actually a different way of thinking about that responsibility, I think, than the traditional church planting, which says learn how, you need your good Bible study, you need a good speaking skill, and they don't actually teach you how to be human with other humans, especially in very human circumstances. So that's the little book, right, how to sit beside somebody at a hospital visit is in the little book. It wasn't in the training, it wasn't in the class. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I
some
mean,
other tools we could use.
yeah, overall, I mean, I have an advanced theological degree. I love preaching. I would love to dig into how many authors in Isaiah. Like I nerd out on all that stuff. But if you take that and the skills of church planting and putting on a church service and whatever, let's just call all that content. Like that's all content. Let's also just take to the bank integrity, integrity and character. Let's say that's a given. Now we have this other thing which we call context. And that to me is where health is created is context. So
Mm.
I agree, Jesse. I think we have put too much energy into training content and not enough into noticing context. But context is where reactivity is generated. And if you as a leader are not aware of reactivity, you're going to catch it and spread it. And you will reduce the ability for people to experience so-called content. So just in short, I'll just give a brief lesson on anxiety because there are so many kinds of anxieties. If we just look at two kinds, acute anxiety and chronic anxiety. Acute anxiety is any time you or a loved one are possibly in life and death situation. So I grew up in Western Australia, and we have 9 out of the 10 deadliest snakes in the world. There's so many great ways to die in Australia, and if you're kind of worried about
And
the
everything is huge and it's all trying to kill you.
everything is sort of trying to kill you. You go into the swim, you can die in the ocean too. We've got so many fabulous ways to die. But when I was a teenager, my big sister would make me walk ahead of her to school so I'd flush out the snakes so she could walk, behind me. That's a great big sister for you. And and so there were two types of snakes that were most common where I grew up. There's the dew guide, which is 6 or 7 feet long. It's a big snake, but it's very shy. So you almost always see it as it's leaving. By the time you see it, it's on its way. But the tiger snake, which has a yellow belly and a black top, it's got the colors of a tiger, it'll come chase you. It's quite aggressive. And I remember walking through on the way to school, the uncleared land, and I see this rustling in the leaves just by my foot, and I see a very black, and I just start running and screaming like a little boy. And because tiger snake, that's acute anxiety. That's acute anxiety. Maybe it wasn't a tiger snake. It doesn't matter if I was really in danger, but my body is saying to me, get to safety. As I reflect on it, I did not make sure my sister was safe. Anyway, I'll apologize to her
That's
later,
also
but
the way the brain works because it's not
teenage.
about others. It's only about you in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my wife's great moments as a parent is here in Colorado where we live, seeing a snake when she was out with my boys. The boys were like 6 and 4. And my wife said, every man for himself. Not a great mothering moment, but a fun story for us. But anyway, that's acute anxiety, life and death. If you swerve in a car accident, or you have to brake hard that's life and death. Your body floods you with adrenaline, your brain gets really sharp, and it's all about safety. My field is chronic anxiety. It's commonly called reactivity. That's the word I've been using. Leadership anxiety. It's the most common anxiety a leader and a parent faces. What's fascinating is it's never based on a true threat. It's always based on a false threat. It's always based on a false threat. So I'll just pull
Wow.
it up for us here. Let's see. There we go. These are the four dynamics that generate reactivity: assumptions, false expectations, false beliefs, and false needs. So when Jessie was talking about, oh, what is that person thinking? I'm enmeshing. I'm anxiously trying to make sure they're thinking about me. You're now in assumption. You're no longer in reality. And what's fascinating, I can send that out later to everyone, but what's fascinating about reactivity is it acts just like acute anxiety. Like your body cannot tell the difference in the moment between actual danger and perceived danger. So when I'm in a hospital room as a young chaplain and someone's screaming at the top of their lungs in shock, my brain is in reactivity. It's telling me, you must say something to make it better. And I'm no longer aware of the Lord because I'm now depending on self. I've forgotten the Lord. I think this is why through and through the scripture, we are reminded to remember the Lord, because one of the things that reactivity does is it kicks you away from awareness of God's presence and it puts you in self-survival.
Mm.
So I'm a people pleaser, for example. And so the need to make someone feel better has more to do with my need to please people than what God's calling me to do. My capacity to be with an anxious person is majorly reduced because I must make them feel better for me to feel better. That would just be a short nutshell of reactivity. You start looking at the pastoral role and you start discovering, like, if you're driven by control or perfection, I'll actually put up here for us the five main drivers of chronic anxiety. These are the five core false needs of every human: control, perfection, having the answer, being there for people, and approval. Let's just take two. Do we have 2 minutes for this, Jessie, or are we on a time crunch?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about perfection. Some of you are perfectionists. Ministry tends to attract the bottom three the most. But let's talk about perfection. Those of you who are perfectionists, you believe you have to get it perfectly right the first time you ever do something. Like, you don't give yourself permission to be a rookie. You have to be an expert. That's crazy, but that's what your core belief is. For me, I'm the bottom three, being there for people. My brain cannot tell the difference between your need and my incessant need to be needed. So if you look at these big five, I'm moving kind of quickly here, but you suddenly realize, oh, wow, these are the false needs of every human. These are the needs that keep us anxious or reactive. These are also the five core character traits of God. God is in control. God is perfect. God knows everything. God's there for everybody. But what happens is humans, we fall for the very first temptation that you can be like God. And so what happens with reactivity is anytime we are stepping into territory that is more than human sized, we're trying to control more than God's asked us to control. We're trying to do it perfectly instead of being a human where we get to learn and make mistakes. We get reactive. We live out of a false need. And that's where so much damage is done in the church. People disconnect. We're no longer listening to learn. We're now listening to defend. Our capacity to engage difficult people reduces. We burn out. So reactivity is a big deal. But just learning to know when you're reactive, that's where it starts, learning to notice it for sure.
Yeah, those are also the five shadow sides of APEST.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's intentional or not intentional, but yeah, those are the five different shadows.
Yeah.
The reactivity for me, I mean, perfectionism is in there. I always say that I'm a recovering perfectionist, which is why I keep making mistakes. It's an ongoing an ongoing process.
Yeah.
Also, why Hebrews 10:14 is so important to me, which is the verse that says that God has made forever perfect those who He is making holy. So I'm like, okay, so it's not God's responsibility. It's not God's accountability for me. But I think it was in the season where I was learning from some of Brene Brown's language about not armoring up. And I grew up in a violent home. My home had a lot of unpredictability and violence in it. And so armoring up was, of course you're going to learn to do that as a kid. You're trying to survive. And so the practice of not armoring up has taken a lot of work, but your brain has about 6 seconds to kind of choose, from a stimulus to choose how are you going to respond in this moment. And what I learned was the spiritual discipline of somebody's coming at me with whatever, I'm going to take those 6 seconds and just invite Jesus to be my buffer. Like, I'm not going to armor up. I'm going to ask the presence of God to be in between me and this other person. So then I know what to do. So if I have 6 seconds, I'm just calling out the nuclear weapon, which is the presence of God to come help me because I don't know what to do.
I think also really
And
important.
I think that that's a spiritual discipline. I don't know if we teach people well enough.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think it's also really important to say, like, you've taught us about secure attachment, and then the advanced work is secure enough attachment. I could see somebody listening to us chatting and saying, okay, every time I'm anxious, I need to take the 6 seconds. The good news for us is if you live this way 10 to 30% of the time, it can change everything. So you don't have to Like I don't teach people to no longer be anxious. I just teach them to manage it. Just notice it and manage it. The same with attachment. Even if you're attaching 30% of the time, they call that secure enough. So, particularly for our perfectionists, you do not have to get this right all the time. You don't even have to get it right half the time. Just being aware 10 to 30% of the time can really bring you some relief.
That's a very good point, especially for the perfectionists out there who are trying to get it right. Um, because and this is where I think that it makes a difference then for the environments that we're creating as church planters, as people who are part of faith communities. I mean, obviously, if you're listening to this webinar, you're here, then you feel some sort of initiation or impetus to to know how to deal with all of the things that are coming in, how to be more trauma informed, how to be more aware of meeting the needs of the souls of the people that are coming in. And I think in addition to being trauma aware, I think we need to be shame aware. For me, that's also a super important thing. So like you just did, what you actually just modeled for us is an awareness that a person dealing with perfection is going to hear that, see the gap between where they are and where they think the standard is, and shame feels that gap. That's part of the fall, right? That shame fills the gaps wherever we're not secure, either in ourselves or secure with other people. And I don't know if we operate as humans in disciple making communities with enough awareness around shame, around the shame that's created implicitly, the opportunities for shame to come in. Because to me, that roaring lion that's looking to devour us has shame written on it, right? Because it, even if I'm not trying to do something to shame you, there could be something that happens in our interaction that the enemy comes in and brings shame to tear us apart, to harm you, to harm me. Like to me, that active, proactive darkness usually looks like shame. And so being aware of how shame is operating in us personally, how shame is operating in our community, and how do we stand against that? How do we lock arms? How do we create security or at least processes of repair so that we can fight shame? I can help you fight shame by knowing what's going on in your mind and your heart, and I can remind you of who you are and why you don't have to be ashamed. You doing the same for me. I just think that's incredibly important for us to begin to learn as faith communities. And I'm wondering for you, can you maybe connect shame and anxiety for us, maybe even a little more overtly, like how much of the anxiety I feel, how much of is that actually shame? And it's just my way I'm coping with shame isn't avoidant, it's actually just anxious, or maybe there's some differences there. Unpack that for us.
Yeah, I was listening to a fascinating podcast. It was Ian Cron's Typology. I'm sure many people are familiar with Ian Cron. And Dr. Kurt Thompson was the guest. And Kurt Thompson, I think, is one of the leading people teaching us about shame. He's a Christian psychiatrist. He's amazing. And Ian said something very loving and encouraging to Kurt. And live on the air, Kurt said, Ian, before we go on, do you mind if we just wait, please? I just need some silence. You can, I think it's the last time Kurt Thompson was on the show. You could go find it. Ian's like, oh, yeah, sure. And we all listened to, what they used to call on radio dead time. It had to be 30 seconds to a minute where there's nothing going on the podcast. And then you hear Kurt Thompson taking this like wonderful breath. And he said, thank you. And Ian's like, what's going on? And Kurt Thompson has famously said that a shame message takes 3 seconds to embody in your body. You can feel it, it floods you in 3 seconds. A message of love takes 30 to 90 seconds to flood your body. And could it be that most of us struggle to encounter the love of God because we just don't wait long enough? And so what Thompson was doing on this podcast was modeling for us. Ian gave him a message of love, and Kurt was waiting until he felt it. I thought that was
Wow.
staggering. And so for the last 10 years or so, I have been actively trying to relax into the Lord a dozen times a day. And
Mm.
I don't always do it, of course, but what anxiety, what reactivity is doing is it's telling you to depend on yourself to be well. That fundamentally That's reactivity. I want to be so careful here, Jesse, because
Mm,
depression, anxiety disorder, trauma, bipolarity, those are different. I'm only talking about reactivity, the false needs that feel real. I don't want anybody, like if you take mental health medication, I believe that's a gift from God and you should thank God and take it. Mental health medication is not a comment on your faith, it's a comment on your chemicals. So I really want to make sure you're not hearing me say, oh, all anxiety is false. No, no, just reactivity, just the anxiety that tells you it's a real need when it's not, like perfection or control. So what it does is it's making you depend on self to be well, and therefore shame is the great threat to being well,
mm,
because shame is telling you you're not enough, you're not lovable. Like one of the journeys I went on, Jesse, started for me about 8 years ago, is when I suddenly realized I've always thought my belief in Jesus is my deepest belief. I was not
mm,
raised in the church. I did not grow up in a violent home, but I grew up in a really difficult home. And the church was a refuge for me as a teenager. And I came to realize not long ago, like 8 years ago, oh, my belief in Jesus is not my deepest belief. It is my most precious belief. That's true.
mm.
But my deepest belief is that I'm not worth loving. That's what's my deepest belief, that I
Wow.
have to do something or be something else to be loved. You know, Jacob in the Old Testament, he was always trying to get God's blessing by being someone other than who he was. And so I just believe if we as leaders can say, you can be exactly yourself in this place, and I will be exactly myself. And that's how we can notice the Lord. I think we can help each other hold each other's shame very gently. I do work with a lot of church staffs where sarcasm is kind of their native tongue, and I'm really concerned about it
Mm,
because they push each other around teasingly with vulnerability. And I don't think, I mean, it's fine to have fun together, but I'm always noticing, is your fun pushing on someone's vulnerability rather than inviting their vulnerability? Just these little micro moves to make sure that we are honoring each other's shame. So that's how I think shame and anxiety are connected. I think shame is what we depend on when it's too vulnerable to believe we're loved.
mm. Let me sit with that for a second. If you have any questions, we're gonna spend our last 15 minutes here together, fielding some Q&A from you guys who are present and here with us. Um, Yeah, I mean, if I think about the garden, then when shame first enters into the story, and shame is not one of those innate emotions that we're born with, right? It's a social emotion. It comes into our life as a function of relationships with other people. And when I look at the garden narrative, that shame, that knowledge beyond what you could handle came first. Shame comes next, and then disconnect and trying to solve your own problems, and that covering yourself up with fig leaves and all of that, like self covering was what happened there. The idea of covering ourselves and trying to provide and make ourselves well, to me, yeah, is just that natural output of why did I think I love God's question here. Who told you you were naked? And to me, the implication then is, and who told you there was anything wrong with that?
Yeah.
So it's yeah, just incredible to me how much we have narratives in our head that we're doing it wrong and it's wrong and we have to do more and we have to be more. Um, let's go to some of these questions. We have a question from Gal asking about the 5 different shadows. If you could post that up here again.
The big five, right?
Mhm.
Is that what we're asking about? The big five
Yeah.
false needs of every human. And then I think she's
Yeah.
also asking the APEST, if you want to run us through the APEST, because each of these five do have a human equivalent that is healthy.
Right. Right. So that's why they're a shadow, right? So approval would be the shadow in the evangelist. Being there for people would be a shadow in the shepherd. Having the answer would be, I think, a shadow in the prophetic, actually.
Yeah.
Perfection, the shadow of the teacher. But maybe we could debate what those are. Um, and then control shadow in the apostolic. But I don't know. Do you map them? Do you map them differently there, Steve?
Oh, I think there's so many ways to go with this, but But yeah, what I do if I'm doing a workshop or something, I'll say, okay, what's the world like when God's in control? Okay, how does it distorted when human leaders try to control? What damage is done? But then, well, what's the human-sized equivalent? And most control freaks I know are really thoughtful, attention to detail, hospitable. So like I did a conference once in a hotel conference room. There were very few outlets around the wall, but there were, like 100 people in round tables, right? And so the conference organizer realized, oh man, people aren't going to be able to charge their devices. So she went to Home Depot, bought all these extension cords and power strips and duct tape. And she ran power from the very few outlets around the walls to every table. So as soon as you sat down, there was a power strip for you and your people to plug your devices in. That's a thoughtful event planner, very courteous, hospitable. But if she's sitting in the event while I'm teaching and she's worried if everyone's having a good time and who's bored, that's a control freak. So you see in that example, a human-sized and a anxious version. Perfectionists are very good at improving things. You give a perfectionist something that's half done and they will make it better. They can do that all day long and not get anxious. But that target of perfection. So what you notice about the big five is they're forever out of reach. Approval, that's one of mine.
Right.
I'm very thoughtful and courteous to people, and I can do that all day long and it doesn't cost me, but I can never get enough approval to be at peace. So you start to realize that chronic anxiety or reactivity is actually at core a false gospel. It's selling
Right.
you
They're
something.
unsatisfiable. Those
Yeah,
taskmasters are unsatisfiable.
yeah. That's right.
Well, so for those of you who are here with us today, what are you dealing with? What is something that you have going on in your faith community that you would be willing to share and yeah, so we can kind of use our time to help meet you where you are. Well, we've got a couple here. Um, how do we deal with the positive people who are coming at us with positivity, who are like, well, we've had that wave kind of come through. The Some people even call it toxic positivity. But how would you recommend that we deal with that in our faith communities? I come from a Pentecostal tradition, and so that can get there. It's all Christianese language, like it's we're overcoming. I am blessed today. Like there's a gift for gaslighting, self-gaslighting, I think, in that. So maybe how would you answer that question?
Yeah, I'm curious if there's a specific, because it is a broad category. Are we talking about the K-love, positive and encouraging, which is what I would call nonsense? Or maybe I'd call it anxiously, positively and encouraging. Like, is there room for the Book of Amos in our Christian radio? Or
Or
do we have to
Ecclesiastes,
what's that?
or Ecclesiastes,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
Hosea.
Yeah, so to me, the Christian life and the scriptures has a wide palette of colors. Um, and speaking of palette of colors, that makes me go to Bob Ross. If you go on YouTube, there's an amazing video. The first time Bob Ross came back to paint a painting after his wife died. His wife dies, he takes some time off, and it's his first painting back on PBS. Everyone should watch it because he talks about the dark colors, the contrast of dark and light, hope in the darkness. It's amazing. I'm always interested. Is our language allowing humans to be human and God to be God? Or is it requiring us to be superhuman in order to connect to God? And being superhuman is the fastest way I know to disconnect from God. I'll be honest, Jesse, I am very suspicious of victory language, but I'm equally suspicious of how many of us have been in churches that talk about 100% sold out, all in. That is nonsense. No one can define what that is. Not a single one of us can say, like, think about
Well, I
how
think in that
many
one, it
years.
means that all the volunteer positions are filled and the nursery never has to like call you back because you haven't showed up for what I think that's what it actually means.
That's 100%. That's hilarious. And so just be human sized. And that means that we depend on ourselves most of the time. And we're all trying to notice when we're not depending on God. We're trying to relax into God's presence. Yeah, it's a big question, but I guess that's where I'd start.
Okay. I think that's fantastic. We've got well, one individual wants to know what is the positive version of being there for people? What might that look like?
Yeah, Jesse, I mean, I think you nailed it. Shepherding. Like I anxiously need to be there for people. My brain says you have unlimited capacity to help people in their need. It's a messiah complex. No wonder it's part of the big five. Um, just, Lord, how many people can I love? Just one more, like that kind of stuff. But if you're in front of me, I'm very caring. I know how to shepherd. I know how to listen well and help you feel loved and connected. That's the positive side. I think where being there for people gets out of control is capacity. Is
Mm.
I have to realize I have limited capacity. I can't help everybody. I can't even help. I can only help a few percent of the people I want to help. Yeah, it's pretty humbling, especially as I get older, honestly.
Right? Because our energy slows down. I think for me, I've endeavored to be present with who I'm present with. And then I manage how many hours a day I schedule myself to be present with other people. And am I doing well for myself, being present to myself, present to the Lord with me, and present to my family? So I let hours in the day kind of help put boundaries on that. At least that's the only way I figured out how to manage it. I don't know. Because I'm not good at not being present when I'm present. That feels false to me. That feels inauthentic. So I don't like to show up as the person who checks their email through the entire a meeting. Like I just can't. I just can't do that.
It also
So
helps notice the price you and your loved ones are paying when you're anxious. So when I rush
mm,
in and overcommit and let people down again, like like anxiety forms predictable patterns. So if you
mm,
know, oh, I'm a people pleaser, you can start to see the impact on you and others. That helps you change as well.
yeah, we've got a couple more here. I want to get to. Um, So one question is around having facilitate a neuro-informed worship gathering. I think that would be a whole other web call webinar to do because there's autobiographical memory that I talk about and how preaching is it's good for inspiration. It's not good for learning and transformation. What is it like for us to experience worship together? What a sense of Hesed love, that some of the stuff that Jim Wilder talks about in there. We could do a webinar series on that. But to just kind of throw out some big nuggets of things that might actually impact a neuro-informed worship gathering, as opposed to a dispassionate, overly rational, disembodied, enchanted worship gathering. We've got what would be some nuggets for someone who wants to explore that? I don't know, just that they could go deep dive in there.
Yeah, I think, Jesse, you are better equipped to answer this. I love the question, and I think you're the one to guide us on this one.
Well, that would take maybe I'll write a book about it at some point, but
That'd be
I've got Your
amazing.
Brain by Jess website where I've got different aspects of that, things like that on there. So yourbrainbygess.com. That's my nerd brain dump website. Well, let's hit a couple others here then. Any how you would handle sarcasm? Sarcasm is interesting. I'm a Gen Xer. Sarcasm is one of my love languages, but only when we have deeper relationship because I don't want to be passive aggressive. And I think sarcasm, when you don't know somebody, comes off is actually passive aggressive. Um, but I don't know what you're coming at it from a different take. Maybe sarcasm isn't your love language.
Um,
Yeah, what would you advise us on there?
and sorry, I'm just getting your website in the chat as well. I put a free resource that I have. I just put your website as well if you want to make sure I put that correctly. I think there's two kinds of sarcasm. That we use the word sarcasm broadly, but yeah, there's a joking and what you're trying to measure is this make I don't mean to be weird here with this word, but is this making us more intimate or less? Is this creating more safety or less? So I'm not like I think playfulness is the proper word for what is healthy. Uh, we can be playful with each other. That's healthy. But most sarcasm does have a passive aggressive. It makes the safety radar say, wait, I can't be myself. I have to protect myself. You can feel when sarcasm has a knife attached versus when it's playful and intimate. But that second category of sarcasm is actually, I believe, an avoidant technique because the sarcastic person is incapable of intimacy.
Mm.
But I don't want to be over earnest about it, Jess. Like a playful sarcasm, if it's moving us toward each other, is wonderful. And I tend to recommend
And what
playfulness
I've
and
noticed though
absurdity.
is that if people don't know you have that depth of relationship with the person you're joking around with, it can actually create it may be safe for the two of you in your communication. It can create an unsafe environment for others. Because they don't know, because it's upsetting to them or triggering or yeah. So the who's watching you doing that, who's hearing you, um, I've found I've needed to increase my awareness
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think playfulness and absurdity are the two safest forms of humor.
that's good. And I think as long as it's not a knife towards yourself, being able to be a little self-deprecating um, is, as long as it doesn't cross that unhealthy place,
Yeah.
is good too. One of the questions that we have here, and we can end on this one, is how do we stay connected with those who are avoidant, those who are running away? Because and you've probably seen this. I've seen this as in churches. Is that um, usually end up with an avoidant attachment dynamic in the leadership with anxious in the staff and the congregation. And so the pastor, the leader is running away and everybody's chasing them and they're not they're not working together. In fact, their dynamics are working against each other and making it more tense and more upsetting or more suffocating and overwhelming for the senior leader sometimes. But what can we do so that we don't go into anxious attachment trying to chase down the person who's avoidant? Like what is how does a secure attached person respond to avoidant attachment other person?
It's fun for me, these giant questions in 1 minute. I put a quote in the chat from Ed Friedman, who's a systems theorist. Insight doesn't work with people who are unmotivated to change. You have to be
Mm,
so careful that if people are moving away from you and you are chasing them, you are part of the problem. And so usually the very simple 1 minute answer is you define yourself. So, one of the hallmarks of our church is we are clear on vision and we coerce nobody. A keen example is when we did affordable housing in our property with our neighbors who didn't want any low income housing around them, the whole NIMBY thing. And some of our neighbors, our literal neighbors of our church, were also our congregants. So when the city required a neighborhood meeting from us, to get input on the neighbors on our affordable housing project, the best thing we did was we got up and we said, hey, if you are both a neighbor and a member of our church, and you do not want affordable housing on our church property, we recommend you go to city council and vote no, and then come to church and worship. No shame. We do not need you to agree. And also, here is what we're doing. So defining yourself without needing to co-opt other people is the shortest answer I could say. If someone's moving away from you, you just define yourself. Here's who we are. Here's what we're about. We would love you to join. We're going to do nothing to make you join. And if you want to opt in, great. But you can have your opinion. Here's where we're going. We hope you join us and let the chips fall where they may. I made that sound much easier than it is, but it frees you if you're anxiously attached. It frees you from needing people to agree so you can be okay. Also,
yeah,
Jess, I
I
just
love
put a
that.
bunch of resources in the chat from you and me for people who want to, chase more, because obviously a 1 hour webinar is a quick bite.
Right, because neuro-informed church planting and faith communities, that's just such a small topic. Really, really niche, really finite. Um, that's what we call sarcasm.
Well
Um,
done.
where we say the opposite of the truth. And that is yeah, so there is so much that we could explore here. And I love that I can finally actually have this conversation with other people. I mean, having been a formally trained neuroscientist for over a decade and very interested in applying neuroscience for over 20 years, like it's just nice to finally have other people to talk about these things with and find out how you're working it out, how you apply things in your world and what you've learned, because it is such a broad space. And I do think that it helps us. Again, I want to care for the souls of the people, their spirits, their bodies, but like all of that is encompassed to me in their soul. So we can do care for souls well. We can care for souls well, then I feel like maybe I'm doing a little better job of being a steward. If this conversation has been interesting to you, then that's awesome. I hope that you can grab those resources in the chat, download them there. And also for V3, you can go to the v3movement.org. We actually talk about this stuff. We care about this stuff. It is part of our church planter training, our neighborhood planting 1, neighborhood planting 2. And we like to walk alongside and do the journey with those who are planting in their neighborhoods, to ask these questions, to coach, to sort them out, to be completely contextualized with who you are, the faith background you come from, and the people that you're meeting with. So this webinar has been sponsored by V3 and the Church Planting Our Learning cohorts. You can find more information there. Steve, it's been so great to have you. Thank you for doing this with me. Maybe we'll find an excuse to do this again and, go deeper into those questions that are all 1 moment, 1 minute long. But it's been so great. Thank you for being with us. Appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Appreciate all of the time for everyone here as well.
I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes. We've got a couple of questions we didn't get to. If that's appropriate. If it's not, I don't want to step in. But for those who had unaddressed things, I'm happy to stick around if yes, we want to kick them around for a few minutes.
I think I actually don't have. I have a very full day. That's not something I'm going to be able to do myself. So, no, we'll have to come back. We'll have to have you back. So appreciate it. Appreciate your time. Thank you for everyone for joining us. Be well and go in the peace of Christ.